There are 4 brand new Commander precons coming to Magic, and they all take place in the world of Fallout. Each of these decks contain a host of both reprints and new cards, and in this video I'll be breaking down the top 10 most expensive new cards that you can find within these precons so you get an idea of what cards are being talked about the most. This video specifically will not be covering any of the collector booster exclusives or any of the reprints. Both of those will be separate videos coming soon. Alright, let's jump into this, starting with number 10, which is Mr. Gutsy. This is a 2-cost 1/1 artifact creature robot soldier that whenever you cast an aura or equipment spell, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then whenever Mr. Gutsy dies, you create X junk tokens, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on it. This is a really interesting card because it itself is an artifact, it cares about equipment, and then when it dies, it creates a bunch of artifacts that are also kind of card draw. For that reason, it feels really good in equipment-based decks, as there's often a lot of artifact synergies. This gives you a really big target as it gets bigger every time you're casting equipment, and very often this thing will at least replace itself with those junk tokens, allowing you to impulsively draw. In aura decks, this also allows you to kind of replace the auras you're casting, negating a lot of the downside of aura-based decks. This is also decent in a +1/+1 counter deck, as it allows you to get something back for your creature dying when you've already invested a bunch of resources into putting counters on it. That means that there are aura decks, equipment decks, and +1/+1 counter decks that are kind of looking for this card, and it is colorless, so it can go into any color combination. You can find it in the Scrappy Survivor precon, and it's currently going for $5.99. And that brings me to a good point before we go to number 9. These are pretty early prices. Prices are going to fluctuate as time moves on, but this is a really great indication of the cards that the community think are going to be the most powerful and the most popular, so it's a really great thing to talk about as we talk about kind of the 10 new cards that people are the most interested in. While you should never pre-order cards or even get cards right away at launch, if you're watching this in the future and want to pick up any of these awesome cards today, MTGRecon is now partnered with TCG Player, so if you use my link in the description next time you're ordering from TCG Player, you can directly support the channel, and it really would mean the world to me. TCG Player is personally what I use whenever I'm ordering cards. You get to shop from a bunch of local game stores, both supporting them and making sure you're getting a good deal on all of your cards. With that out of the way, let's move on to number 9, Watchful Radstag. It's a 3-cost green 2/2 that has evolved, meaning whenever a bigger creature enters the battlefield, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on the Watchful Radstag, and then whenever it evolves, you create a token that's a copy of it. Those copies also have all these abilities, so they're going to be growing at an exponential rate, and they're all going to be getting bigger, so you're going to get lots of tokens that are all getting bigger over time. This reminds me a lot of Scoot Swarm, but it is a lot harder to trigger this, as eventually the creatures are going to have to get bigger and bigger and bigger. However, the thing to note is that the copies come in with no +1/+1 counters on them, so the exponentialness is going to kind of wear off, but you will be making copies as long as you keep playing creatures with power or toughness greater than 2. This is a card that I think is really hard to evaluate without playing it in a game first, and so I'm really curious how it'll play in Commander. It's weird because this seems really good if you care about creature tokens, since all the copies are tokens, but those decks typically make a lot of creatures, not big creatures. I'm not too sure how I feel about this card, but you can find it in the Mutant Menace deck, and it is also going for $5.99. Next up, number 8 is V.A.T.S. This is a 4-cost black instant with split second, and it has you choose any number of target creatures with equal toughness and destroy the chosen creatures. This card seems actually really crazy to me. A 4-mana kill spell wouldn't be good, but there are a couple factors that make this really good. First off, you can choose any number of creatures with equal toughness. Now that might just be one really scary thing for 4 mana at instant speed, but it could also be just one thing and then something that happens to have the same toughness, or it could be 17 1/1 tokens. This is a part board wipe, part targeted removal spell, and it lets you choose any number. It doesn't say destroy target creature and all creatures with the same toughness. You can leave your board untouched every time. In my mind, if I hit one thing with this, I'm pretty sad, 2 things is okay, and 3 is really awesome. And that's a really great spell, but what pushes it over the edge is the split second. People can't cast their heroic interventions or counter spells or use their Mother of Runes to give it protection. This is going to kill the thing it's targeting unless someone is playing more for disguise. This card seems really good and can be found in the Hail Caesar deck, and it's currently going for about $5.99. Next up is number 7, which is Overencumbered. This is a 2-cost white enchantment aura that enchants an opponent, and when it enters the battlefield, enchanted opponent creates a clue, a food, and a junk. Then at the beginning of combat on the enchanted opponent's turn, that player may pay 1 for each artifact they control, and if they don't, creatures can't attack this combat. I have really soured on this card since the first time I saw it. It does seem like it's pretty good artifact hate against artifact decks. Like if someone has a ton of artifacts, this can be really devastating, meaning they can't attack. But it does give them a clue, a food, and a junk. And that junk is basically useless because they can immediately sacrifice it for no mana in order to impulse draw a card, so you basically make them have to pay 2 to attack at all. But then they always have that option to sacrifice the clue and the food, so I guess you're playing this on an opponent who already has artifacts, but the issue is a bulk of artifacts are going to be mana rocks, and they can basically just use those rocks to pay the 1 and basically decide do they want to use that mana to cast something this turn or attack, which I guess is useful, but I don't know if it's worth giving them a clue, a food, and a junk, so in my opinion, this card is a little bit overhyped. It can be found in the Science deck, and it's currently going for $6.99, but I think this one's going to drop quickly when people actually play it in their games. Next up at number 6, we have a card that I don't think will drop quickly, and that is Strong Back. It's a 3-cost green aura that enchants a creature, and it makes equip abilities you activate that target the enchanted creature cost 3 less to activate, and aura spells you cast that target the enchanted creature cost 3 less to cast. And those are both really impactful effects, but it has more. It says enchanted creature gets +2/+2 for each aura and equipment attached to it. Just that bottom line would probably be worth it for 3 mana, but when you add in the fact that all future auras and equipment are going to be a lot cheaper to add to your creature, it makes this card really insane, especially for aura-based decks, which this is an aura. It's not like you're taking a card out of your deck that was an aura and replacing it with just a normal enchantment or an artifact or something like that. This is synergistic with itself. This can be found in the Scrappy Survivors deck and is currently going for $6.99. Alright, next up, number 5, halfway through the list, is Inventory Management. This is a red and a white for an instant that says, for each aura and equipment you control, you may attach it to a creature you control. Then it has Split Second. Another card with Split Second, this one seems really good for a couple reasons. First off, this can be put in aura and equipment decks to kind of just save your stuff or to avoid having to pay equip costs if the creature that's holding all of it currently is about to be destroyed by a spell. This can also be used during combat to throw off your opponent by mixing up exactly the power and toughness of creatures you have. You could put it all in an unblocked creature, you could move it to a creature to make an unfavorable block for your opponent, and it can't be responded to. Plus, it doesn't target anything, it just lets you redistribute them exactly how you want, so you can take 3 auras from 3 different creatures and put them all on one creature or on 2 different creatures, split in any way you want, so this thing gives you a lot of flexibility. It also combos really well with Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots, allowing you to protect your creatures by instant speed split seconding, moving the equipment around. And if it wasn't good enough already, it doesn't have to be stuff that was already equipped, so this can be used to cheat equip cost of equipment that is cheap in mana value but high in equip cost. This can be found in the Scrappy Survivors deck and is one of my favorite cards from the set, but it's currently going for about $6.99. Next up, number 4 is Nuclear Fallout. This is an X black sorcery that says each creature gets twice -X until end of turn, and then each player gets X rad counters. What I find really interesting about this card is that it gives each creature twice -X, meaning for 3 mana this is -2/2, for 4 mana it's -4/4, for 5 mana it's -6/6, and those are pretty good rates, and it allows you to be really flexible. Do you only want to wipe out a bunch of 2/2s and leave all of your big stuff untouched? You can do that. Do you want the entire board to come down? Well, you can do that too. And this rad counter element is also really interesting. This card actually reminds me a lot of Torment of Hailfire. Torment of Hailfire can be used to kind of wipe the board, but it's most often used to win the game. You generate either infinite mana or a lot of mana, and it just kills all of your opponents. This does something really similar. It can be used to wipe the board, although this one will wipe your board a little bit, but if you put a lot of mana into it, you're going to give your opponents and yourself a lot of rad counters. Now, this is going to do one of 2 things. It's either going to mill your opponent out if the number of rad counters is greater than the number of cards in their library, or it's going to deal enough damage to them that it's going to kill them, because remember, for every non-land permanent they mill, they're taking a damage. What's key about this is that you do it during your first main phase, so if you're casting this on your turn, everyone is going to mill themselves out first, and you will be the last person to mill yourself out, meaning 1 turn after their next turn, everyone will be dead, and you will be the last one standing with no library. And that's assuming that they don't have enough non-land permanents in their deck to just kill them on their first main. I think this card is really interesting because of that, and it can be found in the Mutant Menace deck and is currently going for $7.99. Next up, number 3, we have the Pip-Boy 3000. This is a 1-cost equipment with Equip 2, and then whenever equipped creature attacks, you can choose 1. Draw a card, then discard a card, put a +1/+1 counter on that creature, or untap up to 2 target lands. This is a really versatile spell. Are you wanting to dig for a combo? Well, that top ability is good. Are you wanting to fill your graveyard? That top ability is good. Are you a +1/+1 counter deck or a Voltron deck that wants to make this creature really big? Well, that middle ability is great for that. And are you just trying to get some more mana or double spell on a turn? Well, that bottom ability is really great for that too. Plus, if you equip this to a creature and then attack, you can untap the 2 lands you used to equip it, which means you almost get to equip it for free your first turn, and then every turn after that you can loot, which is probably the most powerful ability on here, you know, competing with the untapping 2 target lands. If you're a deck that runs things like Gaia's Cradle or lands that tap for multiple mana, this can ramp you heavily. This just seems like a very versatile card that a ton of decks are going to want, and because it's colorless, it can go into all of those decks. and it's only 1 mana, and the first activation can pay for the equip cost, meaning it's a very low mana cost to get this thing going. It can be found in the Scrappy Survivors deck and is currently going for $8.99. Next up, number 2 is Radstorm, a 4-cost blue instant with Storm and Proliferate. If you're in a deck that cares about counters, this is probably going to be a good card. Even if you aren't casting a lot of spells, you can save this for an opponent's turn where they cast 2 or 3 spells, copy it a couple times, and proliferate up all of your stuff, kind of throwing your opponents off. Are you a +1/+1 counter deck? Well, this can happen during combat. Are you a Planeswalker deck? Well, you can do this on the end step before your turn and get all of your Planeswalkers to ult, and it just seems like it's an incredibly versatile card that any deck that cares about counters in any way wants. We all know how good Storm is, and this can be found in the Mutant Menace deck, and it's currently going for $9.99. Alright, and finally, at number 1, the most expensive new card from the Fallout Commander decks. It is actually an uncommon. It is a Nuka-Cola Vending Machine. This is a 3-cost artifact that you can pay 1 and tap to create a food token, and then whenever you sacrifice a food, you create a tapped treasure token. I have talked about this card a number of times, but in an artifact deck, it is pretty amazing. It itself is an artifact, and then it allows you to create artifacts that then when you sacrifice those artifacts, create more artifacts which can be sacrificed, meaning if your deck cares about artifacts dying or entering the battlefield or just having a lot of them, this is a really easy way to get that. It also means every food deck now gets some mana back whenever they're cracking their foods, and this just seems like the kind of card that, it being colorless, it's going to end up in a lot of different decks for a lot of different reasons. It's a token, it's an artifact, things are entering, things are leaving, things are being tapped. It's a lot of the things that a lot of decks are looking for, and so it makes sense that it's commanding one of the higher price tags, although it's actually tied for Radstorm, going for $9.99, and it can be found in the Science deck. Alright guys, those are the top 10 most expensive new cards in the Fallout Commander decks. I will be doing separate videos here covering the reprints and the collector booster exclusives, so stay tuned for those. If you want to pick up any of these cards, check out the link below, although I would wait a little bit after this video is released to see all the prices come down on them. And if you want to see more content from me right now, you can check out this video where I talk about 5 Commander precons you should pick up right now, and this video where I talk about the actual value of serialized Magic cards. I'll see you guys in the next one.